Welcome to A Dose of Feeling. I'm Mushka, just a real human navigating the beautiful chaos of life. This podcast is about keeping it real, sharing my highs, lows, and the lessons that shaped me. It's a mix of stories, inspiration, and honest conversations, like chatting with a friend who just gets it. So get comfy and let's dive into this journey together. Let's feel it all. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode. This episode is about finding my voice in my marriage. I wanted to share some things that I may not have shared in other spaces, only because I find that there are so many lessons from it that, of course, I've learned, but that so many others can learn or may have found themselves in similar situations. And I just want to put it out there that for this episode and any other episode, if I ever talk about experiences in my marriage or things with my husband, that if I share them, it's because I have gotten permission to do so. And at this point, every time I ask him, he's like, yeah, you have permission for forever. If it was up to him, he would probably be sharing our entire life. And I am just the one who doesn't always feel comfortable with that. And I'm learning to step into stories that I feel have lessons and have meaning and can help others. So that's where this comes into today. I haven't really shared so much about our history of addiction in our marriage, and I really feel like that's another topic and it's a whole, honestly, like a 5-part episode. But when we were married about 6 years, addiction really blew up in our lives, in our marriage, and it had been going on from the beginning of our marriage, but it really caused like a huge blow up. And that was 6 years ago, thank God. And we've definitely come a long way. But what I want to share about today is my story of finding my voice and putting my foot down in circumstances that I never would have felt comfortable doing. I want to paint a picture for you that when I first got married, I don't like to say naive because I wasn't really. I was just naive in the sense that there would be problems in my life, and I thought I was over the hump of the problems in my life. And like I've shared previously, that I wanted to get married and believe that everything would dissolve. I would be happy, someone would love me, I would love someone, we'd live happily ever after, I could do whatever I wanted, I'd be an adult. And I I laugh thinking about it now because back then that couldn't have been farther from the truth. So I was naive in the sense of thinking that everything would be perfect. But I also would say that I was quiet, I was shy. I was also very scared to speak up for myself or to use my voice because I was scared of the consequences. I mean, clearly I've done enough work to know that this is not the case anymore. But back then, I feel like I had done some work in understanding, like, what am I afraid of and speaking my truth and why can't I stand up for myself? But I couldn't really get it, especially when I was 20. I was young. I was newly married in a new country and trying to figure out everything for myself. And I was scared to really ever defend myself or speak up for myself. And so that led to a lot of circumstances where I was walked over and I was manipulated and controlled, not necessarily in my marriage, just in life, by other family members and friends and strangers, because I just went with a lot of things and I just nodded and smiled and carried on. And I don't remember if deep down I was really bothered by these things. It was, again, like all that I knew. But I know that it bothered me that I couldn't have the opportunity to sometimes say the things I wanted to do. And especially with anxiety at the same time, I would replay everything 100 times in my head, and I would just be like, what what else could I have said? Why didn't I say this? I should have said this. What were they thinking? Oh no, can I go back? Well, and the truth is, I probably never would have gone back. I just would have contemplated it and ruminated over it in my head over hours. And even today, it sometimes happens, but nothing compared to the scale that it was on. And it's funny, I'm thinking of something. A couple months ago, I was at this retreat and I was saying bye to one of the men and on this retreat, and I said to him, I said, maybe I'll see you soon. Maybe you'll come visit me and my husband. Come and visit, let's call him Sam. And you can come visit your friend, come visit your friend Sam. And then he looked at me like a little funny and he said, bye, bye, Mushka. And afterwards I realized, shoot, I said his name instead of saying his friend's name. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's going to think I'm such a weirdo. So I went up to him 10 seconds later, which I never would have done in the past. And I said, oh my gosh, I accidentally said your name, but I meant visiting your other friend. And he's like, I know, Mushka, it's okay. And I was just like, I had to say that. I could not ruminate that over and over tonight. I had to say that out loud. And I was really proud of myself for that. But it's a big deal for me to find myself in those situations where I can just capture those moments and say, okay, maybe I said the wrong thing. Maybe I didn't speak up for myself and just say, okay, it is what it is and carry on. It's not the end of the world. They go on and they think about something else as well. So back to me, and again, it goes back to like being told, keep your mouth quiet. We're good girls and we don't speak up for ourselves. We don't talk. We just listen and do what we're told and we're goody goodies. Really played so much into my life because obviously I don't regret a lot of things, but I miss the fact that there were many opportunities that I could have said more and done more for myself. And I know it wasn't meant to happen, and I'm totally at peace with that. It's just interesting for me to see that today and to accept that was that. So once things started to get a little bit rocky in my marriage, I didn't have the space or the words or the understanding to really stand up for myself. And my husband was great. He really was. He tried very hard. And at the same time, there was a lot of struggle. He was struggling with multiple addictions, and I didn't really understand the extent of a lot of them. They were only just beginning to get pretty severe and slowly start to impact our relationship. But at that point, I just saw the behaviors that were done to me. Some of the manipulation and the gaslighting and the control and kind of like that emotional, I don't like to say abuse, but like that emotional pain that I experienced. And so I can go into a lot of that, and there's so much to that, but really, I, I, a lot was, I was bearing the brunt of my husband's reactions and behaviors, and it was hard for me, but I didn't really understand another way, and it was hard for me to speak up for myself. And so I just put up with a lot of it until I started getting help, and I was in the recovery rooms for partners of people with an addiction. And this was 6 years ago, and I was in a lot of help and therapy and groups and did a lot of work and research and just to take care of myself, and fast forward all those years of the addiction. And once I started to take care of myself and I looked at my own side of the street and how to care for myself, I realized one of the biggest parts was that I have a say in my life, in my marriage, everything that I do. And that was a huge wake up call because I didn't know that. It just sounds like a silly thing to say out loud, but I honestly didn't know what my place was in any of these pieces of my life. My marriage, my family, who am I? What does it matter? Just get walked all over, who cares? And I realized like, oh my gosh, I have a voice and I have some control of this. And although one of the biggest pieces in recovery is understanding where I do and don't have control, and I know I could not control my husband in any of this, I learned that fairly early on. But what I could control was my response to the way I was being treated. And that started small with things like saying, no, I will not tolerate this. No, I won't be spoken to this way. I feel like I'm being gaslit. I will not partake in this conversation. Things like that. And they sound really small now as I say them because it's been years of me understanding this. But if you are in this or if you know what I'm talking about, you know that in those moments, those are huge. And when I would say something like, no, I won't continue this conversation, I felt like I wanted like the ground to open up. I was like, what am I doing? Who is this person saying these things? It's so scary. And my husband would yell at me. What does that even mean? Of course, you're going to have this conversation. And I would just be like, no, no, I can't have this conversation now. And it was huge for me. And my husband slowly started to see, wow, okay, this is something that she is putting her foot down. And she is becoming her own person. And at the same time, thankfully, my husband was really working hard on himself. And thank God today he is a completely different person. And I'm so, so grateful for his whole experience. And that's, for another time as well. But I'm pretty sure it was a shock for him to to see his wife go from one person to a completely different person and to put their foot down and push up against what he was saying and doing because he was used to getting away with so much for so long. And it was really hard for me. And I also know that it motivated him to continue working hard because he knew, and obviously we were in couples therapy and we did a lot of work together at the same time, that he knew that these were the things that were going to save our marriage. There were times later on down the line where me putting my foot down is comical even saying it today because I can't believe that was me. But there were times where I had to kick him out of the house or lock him outside. Not empty threats, like legitimate of you cannot be in this house when certain behaviors were not allowed. I knew that at times when he was maybe going back to old behaviors, old patterns, and I would not tolerate it anymore. When for many years I did. I want to share a story of there was one time where he was befriending someone who started smoking marijuana. And this was years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. He was already sober for a year for multiple addictions, but marijuana wasn't an addiction. And I did not want marijuana to become an addiction. And the way that he was smoking it, and he was becoming too much too often, and I was getting nervous. And it wasn't like one of those things for fun anymore. And I said, I don't want this to become an addiction. And he's like, no, it's only happening every now and then. And I was pretty new, probably in recovery for like a year or something. And one day he came home and he said, oh, I'm going to get a medical marijuana card because I feel like it can help me and for certain things. And I was shocked because I'm so against turning these things into, I have my own opinion about marijuana and substances, yes, but for someone who had multiple addictions to come and say that he wants to do something so frequently and to make it okay, I was just shocked and I didn't know what to do. And I know I was talking from a place of, yes, some anger and fear, but also logic. I was like, that is absolutely not happening in this house. And if you step outside this door, because he was on the way to do it, and I'm glad he told me. And I said, if you step outside this house and do it, you will not be allowed back in the house. And he was furious. And he was really upset that I put my foot down. But so he left the house and he came back a few minutes later and said, "You're right. I will not do that." And that was 5 years ago and it never happened. And I'm so grateful that I actually put my foot down because today, and even then, but today, whenever we talk about that story, he thanks me for seeing what he couldn't see. And I'm grateful that I could find that strength within me that I'd been working on for like a year at that point to know what it's like to listen to myself and to make the judgment of speaking my truth out loud. And that's definitely something now, all these years later, that I'm very, very in tune with. Um, Another story as well, which I find also really comical to this day, and we talk about it and we laugh about it, thankfully. My husband used to experience a lot of rage, and that was like an expression of his yeah, undealt with feelings and consequences of addictions and things like that. And I think maybe 4 years ago, he was at home and something happened and he became really rageful and was yelling. And I said, I will not tolerate that kind of behavior. I will not tolerate someone raging around the house. And and granted, like rage, even today is really triggering for me, but back then rage was extremely triggering because it meant to me that something was up because during his years of addiction, it signified that he was in his addiction to me. Rage equaled like not being in a great place. So when I would hear these things, or he would yell at me or anywhere, it would trigger me instantly and I would be reminded of his addiction and those memories. So when he raged, let's say on a random Monday, I would automatically go to a place of something's wrong. He's going back to old behaviors and I can't have this. I'm really scared. So at that moment when he did this, I freaked out. And I think I also, again, reacted from a place of anger and fear. And I said, get out of the house. And I think it was the winter. And I locked him outside in the backyard. I said, you cannot come in until you calm down. And I felt like he was a child. And he continued to yell at me and said, how dare you? And eventually he calmed down and he said, you were right. I should not have raised my voice like that. And I just don't feel like kicking me out of the house for something like that was worth it. And we had couples therapy a day or two later. And I remember I was really embarrassed because I didn't feel like that was right at all. I should not have reacted like that. There's conversations to have. We had been in couples therapy for a couple of years. There were ways to really talk about things. And I felt like it was a little extreme, but in that moment, that was my instinct. And I felt really proud of it. I had like this pride, like, look at me, I kicked my husband out of the house. And by the way, that was not the first or last. But, anyways, I was really prideful. And this is what I'd been wanting to do if I could do it. And he listened, but it wasn't with the right motives and it didn't really benefit much. So my husband brought it up in couples therapy, and our therapist is incredible. And, we graduated a couple of years ago, but she literally helped us save our relationship. And he brought it up and said, this is what Mushka did. And she just, I think she laughed and she's like, Mushka, come on. And it's like, I don't know. I don't know. It just felt right. I don't know what I'm doing. And she understood that, yeah, maybe I overreacted, but also here I am really practicing my authority, back to being a partner in this relationship and having a say in this relationship, which is really something that I had to teach myself along the way. So since then, that story was like probably 4 or so years ago. But since then, I definitely now know when and where, how I can put my foot down. Thankfully, if you're listening until this point, I want you to know that thankfully our marriage is 1,000 times better than it was, in part to all those experiences of me, of my husband, of us together, bringing us to a place where I can use my voice, put my foot down, speak up for myself when it's appropriate, and most importantly, to have conversations about these things because I never did. We never did. And it led to a lot more harm than good. So, a takeaway for today is that I really want you, wherever you are, whether you're in a difficult relationship, whether you have any difficult relationships in your life right now, that you find yourself afraid to speak your truth, afraid to put your foot down or to use your voice. I want you to know that it's really hard and I really relate to it. And also to practice. What really happens when you do use your voice? What happens when you talk back to someone that is maybe usually scary to talk back to? What happens when you push against something that is expected of you? When you feel like you're being controlled, manipulated, gaslit, and you say, no, I will not continue this conversation, or even just, I have boundaries and I'm not going to partake in this, XYZ. Practice small, and maybe you will get pushback because it's weird and scary for people to see you differently than how they've known you. And that I find is really the hardest part in so much of this, that people see how you're changing and people aren't used to the fact that you're doing something that they're not accustomed to. So know that deep down when that comes out and when you can really stand up for yourself and speak up for yourself, you will feel like a different person. You will be so proud of yourself, and that's really all that matters because you deserve that. You deserve your voice, you deserve your truth. And if anyone is struggling in their relationship or struggling with addiction, please feel free to reach out to me. You can find me on Instagram at it's Mushka underscore. I'm here for you, and I really can understand a lot of those struggles. So thank you for being here. And again, take whatever you want and leave what you don't. And yeah, have a great day.